The rain drizzled softly, an endless grey curtain hanging over the small seaside town of Port Haven. Waves rolled in quietly, crashing against the rocky shoreline with a rhythm that felt almost mournful. The streets were nearly empty, save for the occasional car passing by, and a woman standing by the pier, clutching a bright yellow umbrella that stood out against the dreary sky. Maya closed her eyes, the cold sea breeze tugging at her hair, her lips trembling as she exhaled slowly. She wasn't shivering from the cold, though the damp air seeped into her thin sweater. No, her trembling came from within, from a hollow ache that had taken root in her chest, the kind of ache that comes only from losing someone you love. It had been exactly a year since the accident. Exactly a year since she lost him. Ethan. The thought of his name alone was enough to send a fresh wave of pain coursing through her. She tightened her grip on the umbrella, her knuckles white. How could someone so full of life just disappear? How could the universe be so cruel? She opened her eyes and looked out at the ocean. This was where they had first met, 2 years ago. She had been sitting on the pier, sketchbook in hand, trying to capture the restless beauty of the waves. And Ethan, tall, broad-shouldered, with that lopsided grin that could make anyone feel like the world wasn't such a bad place, had been running along the beach with his dog, a scruffy golden retriever named Max. Max had spotted her first, bounding up to her and nearly knocking her sketchbook into the water. She'd laughed, trying to wrestle the slobbering dog off her lap, when Ethan appeared, breathless and apologetic. "Sorry about Max," he'd said, scratching the back of his neck. "He doesn't have great boundaries." Mia had laughed again, waving it off. "It's fine. He's got good taste, at least. I mean, the waves are great, but I think I'm much more interesting to slobber on." That had made him laugh, a deep, hearty sound that made her heart flutter, and just like that, the spark between them had ignited. From that day on, Ethan had become a part of her life in ways she never expected. He was warm where she was guarded, spontaneous where she was careful. He pulled her out of her comfort zone, dragged her on midnight drives to nowhere, made her dance in the rain even though she swore she hated getting wet. He loved her sketches, always calling her his artist, always believing in her talent even when she doubted herself. And she loved him for it. She loved him for everything. But now he was gone, and she was still here. It had been a car accident, just another rainy night like this one. Ethan had been driving back from the city after picking up her favourite paints. An anniversary gift, he'd told her over the phone, his voice brimming with excitement. "I can't wait to see your face when you open it," he'd said, but he never made it home. A drunk driver had run a red light, slamming into Ethan's car at full speed. He was gone before the paramedics arrived. The news had shattered her. She remembered the way her knees buckled when the officer came to her door, the way her breath caught in her throat like she was drowning. The world had felt so loud and so silent at the same time. She couldn't process it. She didn't want to. Because if Ethan was gone, then how was she supposed to keep going? Mia shook herself from the memory, her vision blurry from the tears she hadn't realized were falling. She wiped at her face with the sleeve of her sweater, biting her lip to keep the sobs at bay. But the pain was relentless, like the waves that never stopped crashing against the shore. She felt like she was drowning in it all over again. Her fingers brushed against the small locket hanging from her neck. It was all she had left of him now. Inside was a tiny sketch she'd drawn of the two of them, his arm around her, both of them smiling like they had all the time in the world. He had loved that sketch, insisting she turn it into a locket so he could keep it close. Now it was her turn to keep him close. As the rain began to fall harder, she started walking. She didn't know where she was going, but her feet seemed to carry her on their own. She found herself at the beach, the same spot where they used to sit together, watching the sun dip below the horizon. She sank to her knees in the wet sand, her tears mixing with the rain. "I miss you," she whispered into the wind, her voice breaking. "I miss you so much, Ethan. It hurts. It hurts so bad." She pressed the locket to her lips, her shoulders shaking as the sobs finally escaped. She wanted to scream, to cry out at the unfairness of it all, but all that came was a broken whisper. "Why did you leave me? Why?" The waves roared in response, as if sharing her grief. Time passed. She didn't know how long she sat there, her body numb from the cold, her heart heavy with sorrow. But eventually the storm began to ease. The clouds parted just enough to let a sliver of sunlight peek through, casting a faint golden glow over the water. Mia lifted her head, her breath hitching as she stared at the horizon. For a moment she thought she could see him, standing there on the shore, his hands in his pockets, that lopsided grin on his face. She blinked, and he was gone. But the ache in her chest didn't feel as suffocating as it had before. She looked down at the locket in her hand and traced her finger over the tiny sketch inside. "I'll never stop loving you," she said softly. "But I think I have to let you go." It didn't mean she'd forget him. She could never forget him. But maybe it was time to stop letting the pain control her. Maybe it was time to start living again, to honor the love they had shared instead of drowning in the loss of it. She stood up slowly, brushing the sand off her knees. The waves whispered at her feet as she turned to leave, their rhythm steady, like a heartbeat. And as she walked away from the shore, the rain stopped entirely. The first rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds, it felt like a sign.